Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to finish the series on the Benoni defense with a sideline, an unusual and very uncommon opening, the Snake Benoni, which is technically a part of the modern Benoni, of the modern variation in the Benoni, but it's nothing like the modern, so I wanted to do a separate video on that. It's this position you see on the board, and we're going to get into the opening, but first of all let me say that I'm going to be showing you three main ideas behind this move. So again, same as yesterday with the check Benoni, we are not going to be going through tons of theory because you don't really need theory. There is no theory. There are some lines that go in 10 or 12 moves deep, but it's way more important to know the plans, and there are three common maneuvers with this bishop and three reasons why this move is played. Okay, let's get into the opening. So d4 by white, knight f6, c4, c5, the Benoni, and after d5, the modern Benoni is the move e6. If you haven't seen the video on the modern Benoni, watch that. The modern Benoni is way more sound than the Snake Benoni, and it's also much more common, so you are highly likely to encounter that as white. Okay, but the Snake Benoni is not a bad opening at all, and even though it's uncommon, it has been played on the highest level, and it's a flexible opening which gives you fighting chances. It seems, especially visually, seems horrible, but it's quite good. Okay, so here white plays knight c3. Now, if you want to get into the normal Benoni, e takes d5, and c takes d5, and then you play d6. So these are all normal moves. And here, if you play d6, normal modern Benoni. Bishop d6 is the Snake Benoni. If you ask me where it got its name, I have absolutely no idea. It might be the pawn structure, might be the snake-like bishop. I really don't know. I don't see any resemblance to a snake. So the move is bishop d6, and what you do basically, you fight for the control of e5 with your bishop, and you claim that your bishop is better somewhere else on the board than on e7, because in the modern Benoni, the bishop either goes to g7 or to e7, g7 way more commonly. So you have your bishop here. You can also have your bishop here. In any case, it's going to take some time to exert control over e5, which is why in the Snake Benoni, white playing e4 is slightly unusual, and usually white is going to play positions without e4, which automatically makes this position much easier for black to play. As you know, the main threat in the Benoni is white playing e5, breaking through, making his d5 pawn a passed pawn, and basically having a good position. We're going to be looking at four moves for white. Knight f3 being the main move, g3, which obviously goes for a bishop fianchetto, which is the second most popular, but it transposes to knight f3 almost always. Then we are going to be looking at two slightly unusual moves, e4 and bishop g5. Bishop g5 also often transposes to the main lines, because after knight f3, the most usual move 7 for white is bishop g5. But there are some independent lines. So basically we have two ideas for white. Either play knight f3, g3, bishop g2, bishop g5, and create one setup, or go for e4. Okay, and since white can choose between two plans, we are going to try to see what black plays against each, and I'm going to show you three plans for white, three ideas behind this bishop move which you can use in your own games. You can find them written on the screen on the right side of the board as well. I just thought that would be easier. So let's get into the main line first. So knight f3 is the main move. Black can now castle or play bishop c7. It depends on what you want to do. Castling is, well, one way to play. And by castling, you go for the plan of rook e8, bishop f8, which I'm going to show you now. So you castle. White plays bishop g5, which is the main move. You now play rook to e8, and after e3, not e4, because of course this rook is already very dangerous. After e3, black plays bishop f8. And now what does this move allow? Well, if we know that we are fighting for the control of the e5 square, and that's our biggest weakness in this position, we want to do two things. Firstly, we want to play d6, solidify our pawn structure. So after something like bishop d3, which is the main move, play d6. And after, let's say, h3, stopping bishop g4 or knight g4, we play knight b to d7, again controlling the e5 square. White castles. And now the main plan here is to go for your queenside pawn expansion. Let's not forget that we are playing the Benoni, even if it's the Snake Benoni. So what you want to do is a6, b5, rook b8. You want to go for these moves. You prepare them with the move a6. White is going to play a4. You continue with rook b8, and now basically you are trying to push through b5 at all costs. White is going to seek counterplay in the center and try to stop you with your queenside play. Now these positions are equal, and one thing that you get with this early bishop to d6, and I'm going to show you one game with this idea to just illustrate the power of it, is the move knight to e5, and knight e5 supported by the rook in conjunction with the plan of g6, bishop g7 is a very powerful idea. Okay, so this is one way to play, going for bishop to rook e8, bishop to f8, and early castling. So after knight f3, if you castle, remember that you are castling to play rook e8, bishop f8, and then d6, knight d7, and go for a6, b5. The other way to play, instead of castling, is, I think, the main plan in the Snake Benoni, and that's supporting the e5 square by your bishop from c7. And this may seem strange to you, so black just played bishop d6. White played a useful developing move, and now black plays bishop c7. This seems like a beginner is playing chess, and it seems quite unsound to move your piece twice, and then a few moves later to block it in with d6 and give it less scope than it had. So here after e4, which is the best move here for white, you have to expand. Black plays the move d6. So black's three moves: bishop from f8 to d6, from d6 to c7, and then pawn from d7 to d6. Seems strange, but it makes sense, controlling e5. And the position continues with something like h3 for white, which is one of the best ideas. Castles, bishop d3. And again now, you want to go for central play, controlling e5, and you also want to go for b5. So if you remember the introductory video to the Benoni and the modern Benoni and some other lines, whenever black plays a6, white plays the move a4. Rook e8, more pressure. Castles, knight b to d7, more pressure. Bishop to f4, and now you can see how useful it is to have your bishop on c7. Might not be the most active bishop, but it's very useful. And now the second idea behind this bishop, if you remember the Benoni knight maneuver, which is the after knight coming to d2 and to c4, you can quite often use this bishop to place it on a5 and to either trade this knight off or simply put pressure along the dark squares. So we're going to see that now. Now the second part of the plan with bishop c7 is increasing the control over the e5 square and disrupting the bishop. So let's say white wants to go knight d2, knight c4. What you want to do is over-defend or over-protect the d6 square and attack the bishop, so knight f8. This is a very common plan. Bishop c7 is always going to be played in conjunction with this knight b to d7, knight d7 to f8, knight f8 to g6, attacking the bishop. The bishop will go to g3. And then you can even reroute your f6 knight to d7 and over protect the e5 square. So knight to d2, knight g6, bishop g3, and now as soon as possible, as long as you can play e5, knight e5, and not be forced to capture with a pawn, then you are fine. In this position, of course, the bishop is hanging, so black can either take or not, but he doesn't really want to give away his bishop. Okay, so bishop to e2, and now bishop to a5. And this bishop, since it doesn't have to protect the d6 square anymore, has just transferred itself to a very useful diagonal. What you have to know is that, obviously, if the c3 knight falls, then the e4 pawn falls, which makes it harder to play f4, which makes it harder to control the position. So bishop a5 is an extremely annoying move. Let's say after bishop e2 you play a slightly less active move, bishop d7, which is also a fine move. You're going to play bishop a5 later. And let's say white continues with f4, which is visually the most appealing variation. Well, the e5 knight really isn't threatened by this f4 move. You simply put the knight back on g6. Now, of course, e5 is still stopped. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces controlling e5. And let's say white plays rook e1, trying to increase control. You just go rook b8, seeking counterplay on the wing. So this bishop d6, bishop c7, d6 stuff actually makes sense. And if white doesn't know what he is doing, if he is only used to playing against the modern Benoni and normal plans with the bishop on g7, then he could be in trouble quite quickly. Okay, so this is bishop c7. Now, another thing I would like to show you is the plan of transferring the bishop to e5. But before we get on to that, I'm going to show you what happens if white plays the move g3 or bishop g5. Okay, so after g3, black, this is going to transpose, so black can once again choose either bishop c7 or castles. So let's say we castle, bishop g2, rook e8, knight f3. Again, we have transposed to the same position. The same can be said after g3, bishop c7, bishop g2, d6, knight f3. Again, we are in the same position. So regardless of what white plays, either knight f3 or g3, you can still go for the two plans, either castles, rook e8, bishop f8, or bishop c7, d6, and castling after that. If white plays the move bishop g5, there are a few differences here. So if you castle immediately, you have sort of decided to meet the move bishop g5 and enter some of the main variations with that move, which are independent. So in this position, if white plays the move knight f3, we have transposed to the main line position again. Rook e8, bishop f8, we have the same thing. The same can be said if after bishop g5 you play bishop c7, white plays knight f3, again d6, we have the same position, very transpositional. But after bishop g5, if you castle, white doesn't have to play knight f3, white can play the move e3. And now we have a slightly independent variation. White chose to develop his bishop first, pin the knight, now he's going to develop the bishop. So rook e8, bishop to d3, bishop to f8, again, black does the same thing. And here, white has an interesting option of playing d6, which has been played once, but I don't really think is good. I think it's much better to simply develop. The difference is that since white did not develop the knight to f3, the knight can go to e2. Nothing special in this variation. You are still going to do the same thing. You're going to do your d6 and all that stuff. So basically, if white plays knight f3, g3, or bishop g5, you do the same thing. You shouldn't really be worried. The only difference is that the g1 knight can be on e2, but that's really not such a big difference in this position. The only thing we have to look at is what if white tries to meet our Snake Benoni with the most aggressive plan, and that's e4. Now we kind of have to adjust our plan. Playing something like bishop c7, even though it's playable, I think is just running into d6. So you don't really want to allow this in this position where e5 can be played. So if you play bishop to a5, now e5, and this can become very, very tricky. So since the e4 pawn has been played, you don't really want to go bishop c7. It is one of the main moves, but you don't want to do that. Let me just try to illustrate that in these positions. So after bishop d6, if knight f3, bishop to c7, if d6 is played now, bishop a5 is good. I mean, you're pinning the knight, this pawn cannot be supported, something like bishop g5 should be played, and now queen b6, and this pawn is falling, the d6 pawn is weak, and this just doesn't work. And sorry for not mentioning that earlier. But after the move e4, bishop c7 is actually a bad idea. So if white plays e4, he has sort of put the brakes on one of your main plans. So I'm going to show you another idea, which can be played in the other lines as well. So if white goes for, well, not if he goes for knight f3, because then he takes your bishop, but the idea of bishop e5. So if white goes either g3 or does something else, or bishop g5, you can go bishop e5. The idea of that is, if you look at the Benoni bishop, unless it's on g6 and this diagonal is active, if you play the Snake Benoni, then this bishop usually, if you manage to protect the e5 square, becomes a fairly bad piece. So bishop e5 does two things. Superficially tries to get rid of the bishop that's going to be on dark squares, and you're going to have pawns on d6 and c5, so not too much room for the dark squared bishop. And more importantly, stopping the e5 expansion and looking at the d4 square. So this is a very useful square. If you can get your bishop there, then great. You can also trade your bishop off for the c3 knight immediately, and that way the e4 pawn is much weaker. So that's one thing you can do against e4. So bishop e5. If white plays the move f4 immediately, you are not worried about that. I hope you can see the tactic here. Simply bishop c3, bc3, knight e4. If something like queen e2, you have f5. So after bishop e5, f4 doesn't work. White should play bishop d3. Now d6 is one option. You can also go for the immediate bishop takes, b takes, and d6, which is also fine. And now you are saying, well, your bishop is a bad bishop, my bishop is great, and I've gotten rid of my bad bishop that was supposed to be on either e2, c7, or one of the dark squares. But the other way to play after bishop d3 is simply d6, reinforcing your bishop on e5, knight g to e2, castles. And now another thing we have to ask ourselves is what happens on f4. That has to be one of the main ideas. After f4, you can of course either take the c3 knight, or, which is a better idea, you can transfer your bishop to d4. After you transfer your bishop to d4, what you have to be aware of is that white can of course take with his e2 knight. So let's look at this. f4, bishop d4, knight takes, c takes. And now after knight e2, there is compensation for this ruining of your pawn structure. Firstly, it's the weakness on e4. Secondly, you can immediately exploit the spin and play something like bishop g4. So after unpinning with queen a4, for example, bishop takes e2, bishop takes e2, and knight takes e4. And this is an equal position. Here, if white immediately recaptures the pawn with queen takes d4, well then you play knight f6, a lot of pressure on the d5 pawn, queen a5 is coming and stuff like that, so the pawn is going to drop. So the move bishop e5 is quite interesting, and getting rid of your bishop and looking at closing the position down with your bishop outside of the pawn chain is quite powerful. Okay, the other way to play against e4 is simply to castle, and now after bishop d3, which is the main move, rook to e8, you want to control e5, knight g to e2, bishop c7, again you go for the same plan. Now that the bishop is on d3, of course d6 doesn't work, so bishop c7 is a move. Castles, d6, bishop g5, pinning your knight, knight b to d7, and now white is going to expand with f4, and this starts to resemble a weird modern Benoni where the bishop is on c7. So f4, after f4 you are not really worried, you are overprotecting e5. One thing that has to be noted is if white ever plays the move f5, then there is no counterplay. Your knight is coming to e5 and you are just better. So you can kind of ignore this, bishop a5, get your bishop to a more active square, something like bishop c2 for white, and now both sides are going to start maneuvering their pieces around the board without much to do. Okay, so these are the three plans, either bishop to d6, bishop c7, d6, or castles, rook e8, bishop f8, or bishop to d6, bishop e5, d6. And now I'm going to show you my favorite game in the Snake Benoni, which I've analyzed. It was played by Vugar Gashimov, who was a very strong young player who died too young, unfortunately. He had the black pieces against Vadim Milov. Vugar Gashimov was 2740, so a super GM, and Milov Vadim was 2650. So after bishop d6, knight f3, castles, bishop g5 was played, rook e8, and Vugar went for bishop f8. So e3, bishop f8, bishop to d3, d6. We know this position. Castles, knight bd7, exerting control over e5. Now after h3, a6, a4, rook b8. After rook b8, black is trying to go for the b5 break. Okay, and now what does white do against that? White has to seek counterplay in the center. White plays rook to e1, and now if you remember, having the rook on e8 and the fact that you can play knight e5 is quite powerful. So Vugar Gashimov, before going for g6, bishop g7, and b5, he plays the move knight e5. Now white's bishop is attacked. He doesn't really want to lose that bishop, he needs it in the attack. So he trades knight e5, and after knight e5, rook e5, one thing we can notice is that white is going to have a harder time playing the move e5. In this position, he plays the move bishop f4, which I wasn't really a big fan of because the rook wants to retreat anyway. It's quite awkward on e5. e4 in this position. And now, if you want, you can pause the video here. This idea is quite important. This is my favorite move of the game because it does two things, and it helps black transpose his position from an awkward position with no space and cramped pieces into a position in which all of his pieces are good. Pause the video, find the move for black. Okay, so here he plays knight d7, and it may seem like an easy move to find, but what does this move do? Firstly, you are controlling e5. Secondly, you're going to get your bishop to the best diagonal on the board with tempo. The move after bishop f1, I hope you can spot it, is g5. The bishop has to move to h2. The knight goes back to e5, and again now if bishop takes, rook takes, no problems there. Queen c2, bishop to g7, and here already black is overwhelmingly better. You have absolutely no weaknesses. You can prepare b5 in the future, and your position is just great. f4 is stopped. Your queen is good, your bishops are great. Black's bishops are horrible. White's bishops, I'm sorry. Knight d1 by white. Looking at the only weakness in black's position, which is fine, but that can just be snapped off. And here, I hope you can spot this move. Again, pause the video if you need to. Black to play and get an even more aggressive position. Pause the video. So here, there's no time to waste. You need to react. Otherwise, knight e3, knight f5 is coming. So f5. Knight to e3, which is a bad idea. f4. And now, how good is this bishop? This is now already over. Knight c4. This is going to be taken off. Of course, knight takes c4. Bishop takes c4, a horrible bishop with no scope. And now bishop e5, locking the position down. And look at this fortress. This bishop does nothing. b5 is coming after something like queen f6, which supports the attack on b2. The bishop can easily transfer to d4, and the position is already overwhelming. So I'm going to show you here. b5 played successfully. f5, f4 played successfully. This is just... This is a textbook example of how a Benoni can go wrong for white, where everything worked out for black, and the plans he showed in this game are so instructive that I'm not sure you need any more games in the Snake Benoni to learn this plan with rook e8, bishop f8. So let's repeat what Vugar Gashimov did here. First, he played this weird bishop d6 idea, but he played it for a specific purpose of going rook e8, bishop f8. Then what he did next, he played a6, preparing b5, gaining some initiative on the queen side. After that, in the key moment, he played knight d7, g5, chasing the bishop away with tempo, and then bishop g7, and he just got a perfect position. So if you want to study the Snake Benoni and play it, I would recommend it. I wouldn't say it's an unsound opening. I'm sorry, is my board off? Whoa, okay, for some reason the board is cut off. I'm sorry, I only noticed it now. So I'm missing a few millimeters of the board. Sorry about that. Hope it didn't ruin the video. Okay, so yeah, I would recommend the Snake Benoni because it's a really fun opening. I wouldn't say it's the best of the Benonis, but it's fun, playable. If you know the plans and your opponent doesn't, you are going to win some easy games. So just figure out why I've cut the board. I think it's because I've disabled the engine. So if I turn on the engine, no, it's not. Okay, I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry about cutting the board off. Hope you didn't mind that. Let me know what you think about the Snake Benoni. Let me know what you think about the video. And stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.